The city was a monster of glass and steel, an indifferent beast that swallowed the sky. Its roar was a constant, dissonant hum of traffic, sirens, and the faceless murmur of a million strangers. For Mela, it was a world away from the mist-shrouded mountains of her home, where the only sounds were the wind in the trees and the rhythmic tap-tap-tap of a silversmith's hammer. She clutched the strap of her worn leather satchel, the weight of its contents both a burden and a comfort. Inside, nestled in soft, indigo-dyed cloth, was a curated collection of Miao silverwork intricate hairpins, bracelets carved with the patterns of phoenix and butterfly, and necklaces that chimed with the sound of 1,000 tiny bells. These weren't mere trinkets. They were the soul of her people, a legacy of craftsmanship passed down through generations. She was here on a mission, sent by her grandmother, the village elder, to find a patron who understood that soul, someone who saw the art, not just the asset. Her grandmother's words echoed in her mind. The city folk see only the gleam, Miao. You must find the one who sees the light within. So far, all she had found were gleam seekers. Polished gallery owners with predatory smiles had appraised the weight of the silver with their eyes before she'd even unwrapped the cloth. They spoke of market value and investment potential, their words stripping the pieces of their history, their sanctity. Disheartened, she was making her way through a crowded pedestrian square when a sudden jolt from behind sent her stumbling. Her satchel was wrenched from her grasp. She spun around to see a wiry youth darting away, her precious satchel in his hand. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her. Inside that bag was the centerpiece of her collection, the dancing phoenix. A comb so intricately detailed it had taken her grandfather a full year to complete. It was meant to be her proof of mastery. "Stop! Thief!" The cry was ripped from her throat, raw and desperate. Without a second thought, she gave chase. Her village upbringing had given her an agility the city dwellers lacked. She dodged through the frozen sea of pedestrians, her embroidered shoes a blur of color against the drab pavement. The thief was fast, but she was fueled by a primal fire. He was not just stealing silver, he was stealing her heritage. He glanced back, his eyes wide with surprise at her tenacity, and made a sharp turn down a narrower, more exclusive street lined with luxury boutiques. The world on this street was different. The air was perfumed, the windows displayed jewels on velvet cushions, and the people moved with a slow, deliberate grace. It was a bubble of serene wealth, and Mela, with her wild hair and desperate chase, was a stone thrown into a tranquil pond. Julian Fang despised disruptions. His universe was a carefully calibrated machine of acquisitions, board meetings, and calculated risks. Every minute was scheduled, every interaction managed for maximum efficiency. He was just concluding a sidewalk meeting with his legal team, his voice a low, authoritative hum that commanded absolute attention. His suit was bespoke Italian silk, a silent testament to the power he wielded. He was an emperor in his domain, and this street was part of his kingdom. He didn't see her coming. He only registered a sudden, shocking explosion of chaos at the periphery of his visiona flash of vibrant color, a gasp, and then the violent, jarring impact. Mela, in her desperate lunge to grab the thief's jacket, missed her target. Her momentum carried her forward, her hands flailing. She crashed directly into the tall, unyielding figure of the man in the silk suit. Her fingers, strong from years of working metal, snagged on the fine fabric of his trousers as she fell. The sound was unmistakable, a sharp, violent rip. It was not a subtle tear. It was a catastrophic failure of tailoring, running from his hip down his thigh, a clean, obscene gash in the fabric's perfect weave. Time seemed to freeze. The thief, seeing his opportunity, vanished around a corner. Mela landed in a heap at Julian's feet, tangled in her own momentum. The crowd, moments before a flowing river, stopped. Phones, like metallic vultures, were instantly raised. Julian Fang, the untouchable titan of finance, stood in the center of a public square with his trousers torn open. A disheveled girl sprawled on the ground before him. Julian's first reaction was not anger, but a split second of pure, unadulterated shock. His mind, a high-performance engine, sputtered. This was an unscripted event, an impossible variable. Then, the shock receded, and a cold, lethal fury took its place. Humiliation was a foreign concept to him, something he inflicted, not experienced. The quiet snickers, the flash of a camera, they were like insects crawling on his skin. He looked down, his gaze a glacial force. He saw the girl, her face smudged with dirt, her traditional Miao attire, a chaotic splash of color in his monochrome world. He didn't see her panic, or her desperation. He saw an agent of chaos, a liability. He saw the cause of his current intolerable predicament. Mela pushed herself up, her own mind reeling. The satchel and the phoenix comb were gone. A wave of despair washed over her, so potent it almost buckled her knees. But then she looked up and met his eyes. The sheer, unadulterated contempt she saw there extinguished her panic and ignited her pride. There was no concern, no question of what had happened. Just the cold judgment of a king looking at a peasant who had soiled his robes. "Are you blind?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet, each word precisely enunciated. "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" "I was robbed," she shot back, scrambling to her feet and brushing herself off. Her voice trembled, but not with fear. It was with rage. "Someone stole my bag!" Julian's lip curled into a sneer. A classic, pathetic excuse. "And your solution was to assault me? A convenient story." "I suppose the next part is where you claim an injury and demand compensation." He performed a quick, cold calculation. This was a public relations problem. It needed to be cauterized, quickly and efficiently. He reached into his inner jacket pocket, his movements stiff with controlled rage, and pulled out a wallet crafted from what looked like dragon's skin. He extracted a thick wad of bills and tossed it at her feet. "Here, this should be more than enough to cover your stolen bag. Now get out of my sight before I have you arrested for assault." The money scattered on the pavement between them, a flagrant insult. For the second time that day, Mela felt the sting of her culture being reduced to a monetary value. The men in the galleries, and now this arrogant bastard. They were one and the same. A fire ignited in her eyes. She stared at the money, then back at him, her chin held high. "Keep your money," she said, her voice ringing with a clarity that cut through the murmurs of the crowd. "You clearly need it more than I do. Perhaps you can use it to buy a new pair of trousers. And while you're at it, maybe you can buy a personality that isn't so threadbare." She didn't even glance at the money again. She turned on her heel and pushed her way through the stunned crowd, her back ramrod straight, leaving Julian Fang standing alone in the center of the spectacle, the cool afternoon breeze, a final, intimate humiliation against his exposed skin. His assistant, Leo, rushed to his side, trying to shield him with a briefcase, but the damage was done. Julian wasn't looking at the crowd. He was staring at the space where the girl had been, the echo of her insult burning hotter than his shame. Threadbare? No one had ever dared. He had been dismissed by a girl in embroidered shoes who looked like she didn't have two coins to rub together. And for some inexplicable, infuriating reason, he found he couldn't get her face out of his mind. Far from the chaotic scene of the torn trousers, in the tranquil, art-filled halls of the Fang family estate, a different kind of judgment was taking place. The matriarch of the family, Julian's grandmother, possessed an eye for beauty that was as sharp as her mind was astute. She had built the family's initial fortune not on stocks and acquisitions, but on a world-class collection of cultural antiquities. While Julian saw the world in terms of profit margins and market shares, she saw it as a tapestry of history, tradition, and soul. That afternoon, she was visiting a private, high-end cultural gallery, a place that curated art for the city's old money. Her gaze drifted past paintings and sculptures, her expression one of polite disinterest. She had seen it all before. Then something caught her eye. It was a small, unassuming display case in a corner, away from the more prominent exhibits. Inside lay a single piece of silverwork, a butterfly comb, its wings wrought with a filigree so fine it seemed impossible to have been crafted by human hands. The design was not modern. It was ancient, vibrant, and alive with a spirit that the sterile gallery couldn't contain. "This piece," she said, her voice commanding the attention of the gallery owner. "Tell me about it." The owner, a slick man in a tailored suit, hurried over. "Ah, an interesting choice, Mrs. Fang. That is from a Miao artisan. A bit rustic for most of our clientele, but the craftsmanship has a certain raw appeal, wouldn't you say?" The grandmother ignored his condescending tone. She leaned closer, her eyes tracing the intricate patterns. She saw more than rustic appeal. She saw a story. She saw a lineage of skill, a cultural fingerprint preserved in silver. For months, she had been searching for a master artisan, someone who could create a family heirloom she had envisioned, a silver phoenix hairpin, a piece that would be passed down through generations of the Fang family. She had interviewed dozens of celebrated modern designers, but their work, though technically flawless, was cold. It lacked the very thing she saw before her now, a soul. "I am not interested in most of your clientele," she stated, her tone leaving no room for argument. "I am interested in the artist. Who are they? I wish to commission a piece from them directly." The gallery owner stammered, caught off guard. "The artist? Her name is Miao. She is a young woman from one of the mountain villages. She left this piece on consignment. I have her contact information, but I must warn you, these village folk can be unpredictable. Unpredictable is often a hallmark of genius," the grandmother countered, a rare smile gracing her lips. "Contact this Miao. Tell her that the Fang family requests her presence at our home to discuss a private commission of the highest importance." The owner, seeing the glint in the matriarch's eye, knew better than to argue. The Fangs did not request. They commanded. The message was sent. Meanwhile, Mela had returned to her small, rented room on the outskirts of the city, her heart a leaden weight in her chest. She had failed. The phoenix comb was gone, and with it, her best chance to prove her village's worth and secure a future for their craft. She had replayed the chase 100 times, the image of the arrogant, cold-hearted CEO a bitter stain on an already disastrous day. The memory of his torn trousers brought a fleeting, grim satisfaction, but it was quickly overshadowed by the loss of her grandfather's masterpiece. Her phone, an old, battered model, buzzed with an unfamiliar number. She answered cautiously. "Is this Miss Miao?" a polished, formal voice inquired. "I am calling on behalf of Mrs. Fang, the matriarch of the Fang family. She has seen your silverwork at the downtown gallery and wishes to invite you to the Fang estate to discuss a significant commission." Mela was stunned into silence. The Fang family? She knew the name. Everyone in the city knew the name. They were a dynasty. It seemed impossible. "There must be a mistake," she finally managed to say. "There is no mistake," the voice assured her. "Mrs. Fang was deeply impressed by your butterfly comb. She believes you are the only one who can bring her vision to life. A car will be sent for you tomorrow morning at 10. A whirlwind of emotions washed over Mela. Hope, sharp and breathtaking, pierced through her despair. A commission from the Fang family was more than she could have ever dreamed of. It was the kind of patronage that could elevate her village's craft from a struggling local tradition to a celebrated art form. It could bring roads, schools, and a stable income to her people. It was a chance to fulfill not just her own ambition, but the hopes of her entire community. The loss of the phoenix comb still stung, but this felt like a sign, a second chance offered by fate itself. She had to accept. The next morning, a sleek black car, so silent it seemed to glide rather than drive, arrived to pick her up. It ferried her through the city to a part of town she had only seen in magazines, a world of high walls, lush gardens, and sprawling mansions that were more like private palaces. The Fang estate was the most imposing of them all, a fortress of old money and power. She was led through a series of grand, museum-like rooms into a sunlit conservatory where an elegant, elderly woman sat sipping tea. This was the grandmother, Mrs. Fang. Her presence was formidable, yet her eyes held a warmth and genuine kindness that immediately put Mila at ease. "You must be Miao," Mrs. Fang said, her voice like aged silk. "Your work is exquisite. It has a life to it, a spirit that is missing in the world today." They spoke for over an hour. Mela, forgetting her nervousness, spoke with passion about the history of Miao silver, the meaning behind the symbols, the painstaking process of coiling, weaving, and hammering the silver threads into life. Mrs. Fang listened, her expression one of deep, appreciative understanding. She saw in Mela not a rustic artisan, but a guardian of a priceless tradition. "I want you to create a silver phoenix hairpin for me," Mrs. Fang explained, her voice filled with a solemn purpose. "It is to be the centerpiece of our family's collection, a symbol of our heritage and our future. I will spare no expense. And I want you to create it here, at our home, where you will have everything you need." Mela's heart soared. It was the opportunity of a lifetime. She agreed without hesitation, her mind already buzzing with designs, with the possibilities. It was then that Julian Fang walked into the conservatory. He had just returned from a tense board meeting, his mood as dark as his suit. He stopped dead in his tracks, his eyes locking on Mela. His face, for a split second, registered the same disbelief as the day before, quickly followed by a mask of cold, controlled fury. "Grandmother," he said, his voice a low growl, "what is she doing here?" Mrs. Fang smiled, oblivious to the undercurrents of hostility. "Julian, perfect timing. I want you to meet the brilliant young artist I was telling you about. This is Miss Miao. She will be staying with us for a while. She is going to create the silver phoenix." Mila stood frozen, her blood turning to ice. The man who had thrown money at her feet, the arrogant CEO whose trousers she had ripped, was the grandson of her new patron. She was trapped in the house of the one man in the entire city who despised her, a man she now had to see every single day. She looked from Julian's thunderous expression to his grandmother's beaming face, and she understood. Her second chance from fate had come with a very, very sharp hook. The city, it seemed, was determined to make her fight for every inch of her victory. The Fang estate was less a home and more a private kingdom, a sprawling testament to generations of accumulated wealth. Every surface gleamed, every corridor was silent, and the air itself seemed rarefied, filtered of the city's grime and noise. For Mela, it felt like a gilded cage. She was given a suite of rooms larger than her entire family home in the village, with a view of a meticulously manicured garden that looked as though nature itself had been disciplined into submission. A state-of-the-art workbench had been assembled for her, complete with every conceivable tool, each one polished to a mirror shine. It was a craftsman's dream, but it felt hollow, sterile. Her own tools, worn smooth by the hands of her grandfather and her own, held more warmth, more history than this entire collection of expensive, soulless equipment. Her first few days were a study in silent warfare. Julian Fang made it a point to ignore her existence. He moved through the house like a phantom of cold authority, his presence announced only by the hushed deference of the household staff. He never spoke to her directly, issuing any necessary instructions through a stiffly formal housekeeper. It was a calculated display of power. an attempt to reduce her to the status of an invisible, low-class worker his grandmother had inexplicably taken an interest in. He was trying to remind her of her place, to make her feel so small and insignificant that she would finish her work quickly and disappear from his world. It was a strategy that backfired spectacularly. Mela was not intimidated by wealth. She was accustomed to a world where a person's worth was measured by their skill, their integrity, and their connection to their community. His silent treatment wasn't an insult. It was a relief. It gave her the space to focus, to channel her frustration and homesickness into her work. The preliminary sketches for the Silver Phoenix began to take shape. She drew not on sterile white paper, but on rough, textured parchment she had brought from home, using charcoal sticks that smelled of mountain pine. Her designs were not just of a bird. They were of a myth, a creature of fire and rebirth, with each feather representing a story, each curve of its neck a line from an ancient song. Julian, despite himself, found his curiosity getting the better of his anger. Late one evening, on his way to his study, he passed the open door of her workroom. He had expected to see her fumbling with the expensive new tools, perhaps overwhelmed by the scale of the task. Instead, he saw her completely absorbed, her brow furrowed in concentration, her hands moving with a speed and precision that was mesmerizing. The room was a controlled chaos of sketches, bits of silver wire, and traditional Miao textiles she had laid out for inspiration. It was not the workspace of a clumsy amateur. It was the sanctum of a true master. He found himself lingering in the shadows of the hallway, watching her, an unwilling spectator, to a process he couldn't comprehend, but was beginning, grudgingly, to respect. The tension finally broke over breakfast. The dining room was an absurdly long hall with a table that could have seated 40. Julian sat at one end, Mela at the other, the vast expanse of polished mahogany between them, a physical representation of the gulf that separated their worlds. The housekeeper served Mela a delicate portion of eggs, Benedict with truffle oil and a side of microgreens. Mela stared at the plate, her expression a mixture of confusion and distaste. She politely pushed it aside and pulled out a small cloth bundle from her bag, revealing a piece of steamed cornbread and some pickled mountain vegetables, the simple, hearty food of her home. Julian watched this from the far end of the table, his eye twitching in annoyance. It was another act of defiance, another rejection of the world he represented. "Is the food not to your satisfaction?" he asked, his voice echoing down the length of the table, dripping with sarcasm. "It's very delicate," Mela replied, not looking up from her cornbread. "I prefer food that tastes like it came from the earth, not a laboratory." His jaw tightened. "My grandmother has extended you every courtesy. The least you could do is show some appreciation for our customs." Mela finally looked at him, her gaze direct and unflinching. "My custom is to honor my craft. To do that, I need to feel connected to my roots. This," she said, gesturing with a piece of cornbread, "is my connection. Your customs seem to be about showing off how much things cost. It's a bit hollow." "Hollow?" he repeated, a dangerous edge to his voice. He stood up, his towering presence meant to intimidate. "This hollow world is paying for your services, a fact you seem to conveniently forget." "I am not a servant," she shot back, standing to meet his challenge. The distance between them vanished as their anger flared, bridging the gap. "I am an artist, commissioned by your grandmother, who, unlike you, understands the difference between price and value. You see a girl who ripped your trousers. She sees a tradition she wants to honor. I suggest you learn to see through her eyes, or this phoenix will never take flight." She held his furious gaze for a long moment, her own eyes blazing with the pride of her ancestors. Then she calmly gathered her bundle of food and walked out of the dining hall, leaving him standing there, alone in the cavernous room. He was furious at her audacity, at her complete refusal to be cowed by him. But beneath the anger, another, more unsettling feeling was taking root. She had not only challenged him, but she had also, in a way, defined him. A man who only understood price. The accusation, delivered so plainly, struck a nerve he didn't know he had. He had spent his life building an empire on the concept of price, of acquisition, of quantifiable success. For the first time, someone had suggested that his entire world might be built on a foundation that was fundamentally empty. It was a preposterous thought, and he dismissed it immediately. But as he stood there, the silence of the grand room seemed to amplify her words, and for a fleeting moment, Julian Fang felt the unnerving sensation of a crack forming in the perfect, polished facade of his world. The first sign of trouble was subtle, easily dismissed as carelessness. A set of specialized chasing hammers, tools Mela had used since she was a girl, vanished from her workbench. They were nothing special to an outsider's simple steel heads on worn wooden handles, but to her, they were an extension of her own hands. The housekeeper and staff searched the sprawling estate, their polite, efficient movements doing little to soothe Mela's growing anxiety. The hammers were never found. She was forced to use the new, unfamiliar tools provided by the Fangs. They were perfectly weighted and flawlessly engineered, but they felt cold and foreign in her grasp, disrupting the delicate rhythm of her work. Julian observed her struggle from a distance. A small, uncharitable part of him felt a grim satisfaction. He interpreted her distress not as the frustration of a craftsman, but as the clumsiness of someone out of their depth. His internal narrative was simple. The mountain girl was unused to such a fine environment, and had likely misplaced the tools herself. It reinforced his conviction that she was a disruption, a chaotic element in his well-ordered world. He instructed his assistant, Leo, to have a new, even more expensive set of German-made hammers delivered the next day. A gesture that was less about kindness and more about demonstrating how easily her problems could be solved with his resources. It was another power play, a way of saying, "Your sentiment is worthless here. Only money matters." Mela accepted the new hammers with a polite, tight-lipped nod that gave nothing away, but the act of sabotage had planted a seed of unease. Her workroom, once a sanctuary, now felt compromised. She began to work with a new level of guarded intensity, covering her sketches and locking away her preliminary silver models each night. Then came the second, more blatant attack. Julian was in a tense video conference with the board of a European luxury brand they were attempting to acquire. The negotiations were at a critical stage. In the middle of the call, an image flashed across the screen, shared by the other party, a detailed photograph of one of Mela's preliminary designs for the Phoenix hairpin. It was being presented as part of a new ethnic-inspired collection by their chief competitor, a company helmed by the notoriously unscrupulous CEO Chen. Julian's blood ran cold. The design was not just similar, it was identical, down to the unique curvature of the phoenix's tail feathers he had observed her sketching just nights before. It was an impossible coincidence. The leak had to have come from inside his own home. The implications were immediate and devastating. The European board saw the Fang Corporation as either insecure, with its designs being stolen, or duplicitous, for potentially stealing a design themselves. The billion-dollar acquisition was instantly jeopardized. After the call ended in a flurry of polite but firm postponements, Julian's fury was a palpable force in the room. There was only one logical suspect. He stormed into Mila's workroom without knocking, his face a mask of thunder. She was hunched over her bench, painstakingly coiling a thin strand of silver. She looked up, startled by his violent entrance. He threw a tablet down on her workbench. On the screen was the competitor's press release, featuring her design. "Explain this," he commanded, his voice dangerously low. "CEO Chen has been trying to undermine my European expansion for months. Did he approach you? How much did he pay you to sell out my grandmother's project, to sell out my company?" Mela stared at the screen, her heart plummeting. Her design, her soul, was being paraded by a stranger, corrupted into a mass-market commodity. The violation was so profound it left her breathless. Then his words registered, and the shock was instantly consumed by a white-hot rage. "Pay me," she whispered, her voice trembling with fury. She slowly rose to her feet, her eyes locking onto his. "You think I would sell my craft? You think I would sell my heritage for money?" She laughed, a bitter, broken sound. "You truly are blind, Julian Fang. You see a world of transactions, of spies and betrayals, because that is the world you have built. You cannot conceive of anything else." "The evidence is on the screen," he retorted, though for the first time a flicker of doubt entered his mind. Her reaction wasn't that of a guilty party. It was the raw, authentic outrage of a betrayed artist. The pain in her eyes was too real to be faked. "That is not evidence. It is a desecration," she said, her voice gaining strength. "Someone stole this from me. Someone in your house. The hammers, now this. You surround yourself with so much wealth, but you have no idea who to trust." Before Julian could process this, another figure appeared at the doorway. It was Shu Shu, her village rival, who had arrived at the estate a day earlier under the pretense of offering assistance to Mila. She held a tray with tea, her face a perfect mask of innocence and concern. "Is everything all right?" Shu Shu asked, her eyes darting from Julian's furious face to Mila's tear-streaked one. "I heard shouting. Mila, what happened?" As she stepped into the room, a glimmer of silver fell from the sleeve of her blouse, clattering softly on the polished floor. It was a tiny, intricately crafted, silver, featherin, unmistakable fragment from one of Mila's discarded practice models for the Phoenix's wing. The room fell silent. Mila's gaze dropped to the feather, and then shot to Shu Shu's face, a sudden, cold understanding dawning. Julian followed her gaze. His mind, trained to see patterns and connections, instantly processed the new data point, the rival's convenient arrival, the missing tools, the leaked design, and now this. The logical conclusion was unavoidable. He had accused the wrong person. Shu Shu, realizing her mistake, froze in terror. Julian didn't look at her. His eyes were fixed on Mela, seeing her for the first time not as a problem or a disruption, but as a victim of a plot that had unfolded under his own roof. He had allowed his prejudice and arrogance to blind him to the obvious. The feeling that settled in was not just doubt, but a profound, unfamiliar, and deeply unsettling sense of shame. He had not only failed to protect a guest under his grandmother's care, but he had also wrongly accused the one person in the house who was, perhaps, the most genuine of them all. Julian Fang did not apologize. Apologies were a currency of emotion and social appeasement, concepts he found inefficient. Instead, he dealt in actions, and his actions were swift and decisive. The morning after the discovery of the silver feather, Shu Shu was gone. There was no confrontation, no dramatic scene. She was simply informed by the head of security that her presence was no longer required at the estate, and a car was waiting to take her back to the city. The message was clear, cold, and final. Julian had identified her as a threat to the project, and threats were neutralized. He then had his assistant, Leo, compile a complete dossier. It contained everything on CEO Chen He's business dealings, his known associates, and, most importantly, his history of aggressive corporate espionage. The file also included a detailed analysis of Shu Shu's recent communications, which showed a clear pattern of contact with Chen's company. The evidence was irrefutable. He didn't present this file to Mela as a peace offering. He walked into her workshop and placed the thin binder on her workbench with a quiet thud. "This is the man who is trying to steal your designs," he stated, his tone factual, devoid of emotion. "And this," he added, tapping a section detailing Xu Xu's involvement, "is his accomplice." Mela looked through the file, her knuckles white as she gripped the pages. Seeing the cold, hard proof of the betrayal, Shuju's envy and Chen's greed laid bare was a different kind of pain than the initial shock. It was a calculated, grimy sort of ugliness. When she looked up, her eyes were no longer filled with the hurt of a victim, but with the hard, cold fire of a warrior. "What do you want to do about it?" she asked. A ghost of a smile touched Julian's lips. This was a language he understood. Not tears, not accusations, but strategy. CEO Chen believes he has a direct line to my grandmother's project through Shu, he explained, leaning against the workbench, his presence filling the small space. He thinks he is stealing my family's future heirloom. What he doesn't know is that the artist he's targeting is now fully aware of his game. He paused, letting the implication hang in the air. An artist could, for instance, continue to create designs, flawed designs. Designs that look impressive to a layman like Chen, but contain subtle, significant technical impossibilities that only a true master of the craft would recognize. Designs that would lead his company to invest millions in a production process that is doomed to fail. Mela's eyes widened as she grasped the sheer, ruthless brilliance of his plan. It wasn't just about stopping the theft. It was about turning the enemy's own weapon back on them. It was about destroying them with their own ignorance. "You want me to help you set a trap," she said, a new kind of respect dawning in her eyes. She had seen him as an arrogant tyrant, but she was now seeing a master strategist. "I want to help you protect your art," he corrected her, his gaze intense. "These people did not just attack my business, they desecrated your craft. They should pay the price for that. The decision is yours." For the first time, they were not adversaries. They were two highly intelligent people with a common enemy, their different worlds and skills suddenly aligning toward a single destructive purpose. Mela looked at the sketches of the true Silver Phoenix, the one she had kept hidden, and then looked at the reams of blank parchment on her table. A slow, dangerous smile spread across her face. "Get me more silver," she said. "We have work to do." Their alliance was forged in the quiet hours of the night. The workroom became their command center. Mela would sketch, her hands flying across the parchment as she created beautiful, elaborate, and utterly fake designs. She would explain the intricate flaws to Juliana joint that couldn't support the weight, a filigree pattern that would crumble under heat, a setting that would never hold a stone. He, in turn, would listen with rapt attention, his mind absorbing the technical details, offering suggestions on how to make the designs even more enticing, more commercially appealing to a fool like Chen. He saw the depth of her knowledge, the fierce, protective love she had for her art. She saw his sharp, strategic mind, his ability to see 10 moves ahead on the chessboard. The animosity between them didn't vanish, but it transformed. It became a charged current of mutual respect, an unspoken acknowledgement of each other's strengths. He would bring her coffee late at night, and she wouldn't throw it out. She would ask for his opinion on a business strategy, and he would give it without condescension. They were partners, bound by a shared secret and a common goal. And in the crucible of their shared conspiracy, a different kind of heat began to build, one that had nothing to do with the silversmith's forge. The annual Fang Corporation Cultural Heritage Gala was the most exclusive event on the city's social calendar. It was a night where immense wealth and priceless art mingled under crystal chandeliers. This year, the centerpiece of the event was the unveiling of the Fang family's new heirloom, the Silver Phoenix hairpin, created by the mysterious Miao artisan, Mela. The buzz was palpable. Rival companies, art collectors, and media outlets were all eager to see the result of this unlikely collaboration. CEO Chen was there, of course, a smug, self-satisfied smile on his face, believing he was just days away from launching his own, superior version of the design. Mela stood backstage, the finished hairpin resting on a velvet cushion. It was a masterpiece. Crafted from the purest silver, the phoenix was a swirl of motion and grace, its feathers so delicate they seemed to tremble in the light. In its beak, it held a single, flawless pearl that seemed to glow with an inner luminescence. It was more than a piece of jewelry. It was the culmination of her ancestry, her passion, and the strange, unexpected partnership she had forged with Julian. Julian stood beside her, not as a boss, but as an equal. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice a low murmur meant only for her. She nodded, taking a deep breath. "It's time to let it fly." When she walked onto the stage, a hush fell over the room. She was not the disheveled girl from the street. She was poised, confident, and radiant in a simple but elegant indigo gown. She didn't speak of the hairpin's monetary value. Instead, she spoke of its story, of the legend of the phoenix that rises from the ashes, a symbol of resilience and rebirth. She spoke of the ancient Miao techniques she had used, each one a tribute to the generations of craftsmen who came before her. Her voice was clear and passionate, and she held the entire room spellbound. Julian watched from the wings, a feeling of immense, unfamiliar pride swelling in his chest. He saw the audience, the jaded, cynical elite of the city, utterly captivated by her authenticity, by the power of her story. Then she made her move. "True craftsmanship cannot be replicated without understanding," she said, her eyes sweeping the room until they landed on CEO Chen. "It requires more than just a stolen picture. It requires a soul. For instance," she continued, as a new image appeared on the large screen behind her, "one might try to copy this design. It was one of the flawed sketches she and Julian had allowed to be leaked. It looks beautiful, does it not? But any true silversmith would know that the alloy required for this particular filigree pattern would be too brittle. Under the heat of the final setting, the entire wing would disintegrate." Another slide appeared, showing a detailed metallurgical analysis. A collective gasp went through the knowledgeable jewelers and collectors in the audience. "One might be fooled into investing millions into a production line for a design that is, fundamentally, a beautiful lie," Mela concluded, her voice calm but her eyes sharp as daggers. CEO Chen's face went white, then a blotchy, furious red. He had been played. He had been publicly, expertly, and utterly humiliated. He saw the smirks on the faces of his rivals, heard the quiet, devastating whispers. His reputation was in tatters. The applause for Mela was thunderous. She had not only showcased a masterpiece, but had also defended her art with the strategic precision of a general. As she walked off stage, Julian met her in the wings. The charged energy between them was electric. He didn't offer a handshake or a formal word of congratulations. Instead, he simply reached out and gently brushed a stray strand of hair from her cheek, his fingers lingering for a fraction of a second too long. "Your phoenix," he said, his voice low and intense, "is magnificent." In his eyes, she no longer saw a cold, calculating CEO. She saw a man who, like her, understood the art of the fight, a man who had become her most unexpected and formidable ally. And she realized, with a jolt that had nothing to do with victory, that the walls she had so carefully built around her heart were in danger of crumbling, much like the flawed silver in her rival's failed designs. The sleek, black limousine that had ferried Mela through the city's concrete canyons now seemed like an alien vessel as it navigated the winding, unpaved roads of the mountain. The transition was jarring. The world outside the tinted windows transformed from gray steel and flashing neon to an overwhelming, vibrant green. The air itself changed, losing its acrid metallic taste and becoming thick with the scent of damp earth, pine, and wood smoke. For Mela, it was the smell of home, a scent that settled her soul. For Julian, it was like landing on another planet. He had insisted on accompanying her back to her village. The official reason was business. To formally present the initial payment for the commission to her village elders, and to document the traditional environment for the hairpin's official provenance records. It was a logical, professional explanation that satisfied his grandmother and his board. The real reason was far less rational, a fact that both intrigued and annoyed him. He wanted to understand the source of her. He needed to see the world, that had forged this infuriating, captivating woman who had so thoroughly disrupted his own. When the car could go no further, they walked. Julian, in his handmade leather shoes and tailored trousers, felt utterly out of place on the narrow, muddy path. The villagers who came out to greet Mela did so with boisterous joy. They embraced her, their laughter echoing through the valley. They looked at Julian with open, unabashed curiosity, their gazes direct and free of the deference or envy he was accustomed to. They didn't see a CEO. They saw a stranger, a city man, an outsider in their world. Mela's grandmother was the soul of the village. She was a tiny woman with a face like a beautiful, wrinkled map, her eyes holding the wisdom of 100 winters. She greeted Julian not with the formal bow of a subordinate, but with the steady, appraising look of an equal. "So," she said, her voice surprisingly strong, "you are the man with the torn trousers." Julian froze, his carefully constructed composure cracking. The news had traveled that fast? He saw Mela in the background, desperately trying to stifle a laugh, and felt a flush of heat rise to his neck. "He is also the man who's honoring our craft, grandmother," Mela interjected, saving him. The days that followed were a series of revelations for Julian. He lived not in a sprawling mansion, but in a simple, clean wooden house that smelled of cedar. He ate not at a long, empty table, but a communal one, sharing bowls of spicy fish soup, wild greens, and grilled meats with Mela's entire extended family. He watched her in her element, no longer the guarded, defensive artist from the city, but a beloved daughter of her community. He saw her expertly gut a fish, weave a basket with nimble fingers, and sing traditional songs with the children, her voice clear and joyful. He saw the source of her strength. It wasn't born of defiance against a world that had wronged her, but from a deep, unshakable connection to her people, her land, her history. Her pride wasn't arrogance. It was a reflection of the collective pride of her village. Her resilience was the resilience of a people who had survived for centuries in these mountains. Their traditions, a shield against the changing world. One evening, he followed her to the edge of the village, where a cliff overlooked the valley. The sun was setting, painting the layers of mountains in shades of purple and gold. The air was cool and quiet. "You don't belong here," she said softly, not as an accusation, but as a simple statement of fact. "I know," he admitted, his own voice quieter than usual. "My world is made of contracts and stock prices. Yours is made of this." He gestured to the breathtaking vista before them. "I don't understand it." "You don't have to understand it," she replied. "You just have to respect it." He turned to look at her. In the soft light of dusk, with the mountains as her witness, she looked less like an artist and more like a queen in her own right, the undisputed ruler of this wild, beautiful kingdom. The feeling that had been growing in his chest since the day she'd walked out of his office, the feeling he had dismissed as curiosity and then grudging respect, finally crystallized into something he could no longer deny, something illogical, inefficient, and utterly terrifying. He was falling in love with her. And he knew, with the cold certainty of a man facing a hostile takeover, that this simple girl from the mountains represented the greatest, most dangerous, and most worthwhile risk he had ever taken. The village festival was a riot of color, sound, and exuberant life that stood in stark opposition to Julian's meticulously ordered world. Silver ornaments flashed in the firelight, the rhythmic beat of the lusheng pipes vibrated through the ground, and the air was thick with the aroma of roasted meats and sweet rice wine. He watched Mela, no longer his houseguest or his secret ally, but a radiant figure at the heart of her community. She was leading a traditional dance, her movements fluid and powerful, her silver adornments singing with every step. Her face, illuminated by the massive bonfire, was alight with a joy so pure and unrestrained that Julian felt a pang in his chest, a feeling he vaguely recognized as longing. He had spent his life observing people, analyzing them for weaknesses, for leverage, but as he watched her, he wasn't analyzing. He was simply seeing her, and the sight left him feeling both hollow and profoundly full. He was an emperor in a world of concrete and contracts, but here, in her world of silver and starlight, he was a pauper. All his wealth and power meant nothing. He couldn't command this joy, couldn't acquire this sense of belonging. It had to be given. Later, when the main festivities died down, he found her by the sacred spring at the edge of the village, the moonlight turning the water's surface to liquid silver. The silence between them was no longer the charged, antagonistic quiet of his mansion, but a soft, contemplative stillness. "I have never seen you look so happy," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "This is my home," she replied simply. "My spirit is tied to these mountains, this water." She looked at him, her gaze clear and searching. "Why did you really come here, Julian?" The question disarmed him. The logical, business-centric reasons he had constructed now felt like flimsy lies. He had come here for her. The realization was as terrifying as it was undeniable. In his world, desire was a weakness to be hidden, a vulnerability to be guarded. But looking at her now, he understood that hiding it would be the greater folly. "I came because of you," he admitted, the words feeling foreign on his tongue. I have never met anyone like you, Mela. You don't care about my name or my money. You challenge me. You see through me in a way that is unnerving, and I find myself respecting you for it, more than respecting you." He took a hesitant step closer. "I think," he said, the confession feeling like it was being pulled from the deepest part of him, "that I am falling in love with you." Mela's breath hitched. She had felt the shift between them, the strange current that flowed beneath their strategic partnership, but to hear it spoken aloud was something else entirely. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a wild bird trapped in a cage. Part of her soared at his words. A secret, foolish part that had been drawn to his sharp mind and the rare, hidden glimpses of the man beneath the CEO. But another part, the part that was grounded in the reality of her world, was terrified. "We are from different worlds," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of the spring. "Look at us. You belong to the city, to boardrooms and skyscrapers. I belong here, with the silver and the songs of my ancestors. How could that ever work?" The question wasn't a rejection. It was a genuine, painful plea for an answer she didn't have. She was the guardian of her people's craft. Her duty was here. Leaving would be a betrayal of everything she was. "I don't have an answer," he said with a raw honesty that touched her more than any grand promise could have. "But I am a man who solves problems. And this is the most important problem I have ever faced." He looked from her face to the vast, moonlit valley, his mind, for once, not on profit or loss, but on a far more complex and valuable equation. He knew a choice had to be made, and it couldn't just be hers. It had to be his, too. Julian left the village the next morning. His departure was as abrupt as his arrival, leaving a void in the mountain air and a quiet turmoil in Mela's heart. She threw herself back into her work, the rhythmic tapping of her hammer, a frantic attempt to drown out the memory of his confession and the impossible question it had raised. She tried to convince herself that it was for the best. He belonged in his world, she in hers. Their brief, intense intersection was over. 2 weeks later, a convoy of vehicles, far more utilitarian than the black limousine, rumbled up the mountain path. At their head was not Julian, but his grandmother. With her were architects, cultural preservation experts, and engineers. They came not with offers of charity, but with a formal proposal for the village elders. Grandmother Fang, sitting in the center of the village meeting hall, unrolled a series of blueprints. "My grandson has come to understand that your art cannot be separated from its source," she explained, her voice resonating with authority and respect. "To take the artist from the village is to steal the soul of the work. Therefore, the Fang Corporation proposes not to hire a single artisan, but to invest in the entire community." The blueprints detailed a plan that was breathtaking in its scope and respect. It was a proposal to build a new, state-of-the-art silver crafting workshop and school right there in the village. The architecture was designed to blend seamlessly with the traditional wooden structures. It would have modern ventilation, lighting, and safety features, but the workspaces themselves were designed around traditional Miao methods. The plan included sourcing materials ethically, establishing a direct-to-market online platform managed by the villagers themselves, and creating an apprenticeship program to ensure the craft was passed down to the next generation. A significant portion of the profits would be funneled into a community trust for infrastructure, education, and healthcare. It was not a buyout. It was a partnership. Julian was not taking Mela from her world. He was bringing the best parts of his world to hers. He was using his corporate power not for acquisition, but for preservation. Mela stared at the plans, her heart pounding. This was a solution she could never have imagined. It was a bridge between two worlds, a way for her to honor her duty to her people while not having to extinguish the fledgling hope in her heart. She looked at Julian's grandmother, who gave her a knowing smile. "My grandson is a very logical man," the matriarch said. "He has concluded that this is the only investment with a guaranteed return, a future for your heritage and," her eyes twinkled, "a chance at his own happiness." Later that evening, Mela's phone buzzed. It was a message from Julian. It contained no poetry, no grand declarations. It was a simple, logical, and deeply romantic sentence. "I have identified the problem. This is my proposed solution. I await your approval." Mela walked to the edge of the cliff where he had confessed his feelings. The valley was quiet, the stars brilliant in the clear mountain sky. She thought of his arrogance, his infuriating pride, and the cold, calculating mind that she had come to admire. But now she saw that mind had been turned to a new purpose. He had analyzed their impossible situation and engineered a solution that honored them both. She typed her reply, her fingers steady, her heart finally at peace. Proposal approved. The grand opening of the Miao Silver Phoenix Workshop School was a quiet affair, attended not by city socialites, but by the entire village community and the Fang family. The new building was a marvel, a fusion of traditional wooden architecture and modern, light-filled design. The rhythmic tap-tap-tap of hammers already echoed from within, as the first class of young apprentices learned their craft from the village elders. Mela stood beside Julian, watching her grandmother and his grandmother cut a simple, hand-dyed ribbon. There were no reporters, no flashing cameras. It was a moment of genuine, shared celebration. Later, in the main hall, Grandmother Fang formally accepted the finished Silver Phoenix hairpin. The piece was displayed in a simple glass case, the silver seeming to glow with an inner fire. It was more beautiful than anyone had imagined. "It is a masterpiece," Julian's grandmother said, her voice thick with emotion. She then turned, and instead of taking the hairpin for herself, she opened the case and presented it to Mela. "A family heirloom," she said, her eyes meeting Mela's. "Is meant for family. This belongs to you, my dear. Welcome." It was not just the acceptance of a commission. It was the acceptance of a new daughter. A blush crept up Mela's cheeks as Julian took her hand, his fingers lacing through hers. Their own wedding was held a month later, not in a grand city cathedral, but in the village, under the open sky. It was a vibrant, joyful celebration, a blending of ancient Miao traditions and quiet modern promises. Mela wore a breathtaking wedding gown of hand-woven indigo cloth, adorned with the most intricate silver jewelry the village had ever produced. At its center, nestled in her dark hair, was the silver phoenix. Julian, dressed in a simple but exquisitely tailored suit that now seemed to fit perfectly in this world, never took his eyes off her. He had found something here in the mountains that none of his billion-dollar deals could ever provide, a sense of peace, a connection to something real and enduring. The final scene of their story was not one of grand spectacle. It was a quiet afternoon in the new workshop. Mela was at her bench, showing a young apprentice how to coil a silver wire. Julian sat nearby, working on a laptop, a spreadsheet of logistics for their new global distribution platform on his screen. Every so often, he would look up from his work, his gaze softening as he watched her. He was still the cold, calculating CEO. She was still the fierce, proud guardian of her heritage. They had not changed, not fundamentally. Instead, they had woven their two worlds together, creating a new pattern, a new legacy, as strong and intricate as the silver phoenix she wore in her hair. Theirs was a story not of a ripped pair of trousers, but of two torn worlds, expertly and lovingly stitched back together.